here's why. Now, I don't want you to do this at home, okay? But if you were to take a pen and stick it in your ear, and you take another one, you stick it in your eye, where it crosses over will be roughly on a very ancient part of the brain, the emotional brain. And in there is a little thing that you've heard, it's the rock star of the brain over the last 10 years, the amygdala, which people sometimes describe as the fear center, not entirely true, but essentially it's kind of like the smoke alarm of the brain, continually sniffing out to your eyes and your ears, looking for any threats to your existence. And if it sees threats, triggering, you've heard of it, the fight or flight response. Now, threats traditionally were existential threats, you know, saber-toothed tigers. If dinosaurs had lived at the same time as man, well, dinosaurs would have been an existential threat. So things that were bigger than us and could hurt us. But latterly, threats are just anything that's uncertain, anything we don't understand, anything that's new, or anything that threatens our life. So if you're living through COVID, that's a pretty big list of things that are affecting you right now. Now, this emotional brain is simply sniffing the air all the time, looking for, is there a threat to my existence around there, or a threat to my ego, or a threat to the way I feel about myself? And it works binarily. It doesn't have shades of gray. It sees everything as being good or bad. It's either a reward, and in which case it gives the tag. Let's say, did you ever meet somebody for the first time? You don't know them from Adam. You never saw them before. You know nothing about them. You think, I don't like you. Yeah, we all have. Don't worry. I'm not going to judge you and say, ha, you're a nasty person. No, we've all had that experience. What about, have you met somebody for the first time and you know nothing about them? You've never met them before. You've never read anything. And you think, oh, I like her, or I like him. And I could spend time with that person. You've had that experience? There's your amygdala. It doesn't have shades of gray. You've heard people talking about the 4-second rule and first impressions last and all that sort of stuff. That is your amygdala at work. And so it parses every stimulus that comes in from the outside and those from the inside, and it splits them either into reward. So I meet Dr. Peter and I think, he's a nice guy. I could spend time with him. And so the message goes on to the thinking brain. We've just met somebody we think is nice. And the thinking brain goes, let's find all the reasons why that might be. Okay. And then sometimes we meet somebody that we don't particularly care for. And again, it gets a tag, and it's a binary tag. It's danger, threat, and that goes on to the thinking brain there. So all of the time, our brains are alert, and they are simply parsing all of our experiences in a very, very simple way into positive or negative, good or bad, reward or threat, etc. And the thinking brain only catches up a little bit later on. Now, when you meet somebody that makes you feel the way that person we spoke about earlier on, that person made you feel psychologically unsafe. When you're dealing with somebody, particularly on a regular basis, who makes you feel, this is one I did earlier, anxious, nervous, afraid, unsupported, depressed, and they're all similar words. Well, then that triggers you into that sort of danger response. It triggers a fear response. It triggers a response that's not terribly dissimilar to if your life was threatened. Your heart beats a little bit faster, your respiration becomes shallower, your digestive system is switched off, your sex drive is switched off, your immune system is switched off, and you're on high alert, ready to fight or flight, which is unfortunate because if that person happens to be your boss, it's not socially acceptable to fight or flight every time they come into the room. So you kind of have to swallow it down and deal with it, and that doesn't do us any great good. But the key thing here is it triggers a fear response. And psychological danger is, or the opposite of psychological safety is fear. It's psychological danger is fear. We will not speak up or take interpersonal risk where we fear that we are going to be judged, or we're going to be put down, or we're going to suffer a hit. So when we're triggered into that, when we meet somebody who shows up in a way that triggers us into that way of thinking, we become fearful. It becomes about managing risk. If I say this, will he be upset? If I say this, will he start taking the mickey out of me? It turns a culture into, sorry to use these technical terms, you know what CYA stands for? Cover your ass culture. So it turns people into a culture where they're just being really careful. The first priority is cover my backside. We become self-centered or self-censoring. And so in that environment, the first thing to die is creativity and innovation. So that's all. The genesis of all that is the way this person shows up. The way we show up determines the way people feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which we can engage. When we're feeling fearful, when we're trying to manage risk, when we're self-censoring, we can't engage. Our brain is spinning cycles trying to keep ourselves safe. Now, what about that person who you found psychologically safe? And bring that person back to your mind. And as you bring them back to your mind, notice the way things sort of lighten. You notice the physical response, that emotional response in your body, because emotions are just physiological responses at the end of the day. And you notice things kind of lightening up, and it triggers you into a reward state. It triggers you into a place of psychological safety. You no longer care now if you look stupid. When you're around your best friend or your close family, you don't care if you say something stupid. And if you do, you might blush afterwards, but you don't worry about it greatly. And you get what Barbara Fredrickson, really worth reading, by the way, if you haven't read her, Positive Psychology, called Broaden and Build. She says that when we're in that fear-free, psychologically safe, positive environment, we tend to have access to more resources mentally, so that we tend to become more broad-minded, noticing more opportunities, synthesizing more ideas. So we broaden and build our ideas. We become engaged and focused, and creativity takes off like a rocket. Now, here's the critical thing. The way you show up determines the way people feel. It impacts the decision they make, and it impacts the extent to which they engage. So it all comes back at the end of the day, back to how do you show up? Now, here's the biggest, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'll come to that in a moment. Here's the biggest mistake that people make in your client organizations or your organizations if you've already implemented psychological safety programs. I hope you didn't make the mistake, but the majority of people think if you build it, they will come. If you train people on what psychological safety is, they'll create a psychologically safe environment. The challenge is knowing is not doing, and knowing that giving people the freedom to be able to be themselves without cost, knowing that that's psychological safety and that it has tremendous business benefits, doesn't change one whit the ability of people to create that environment. We have to start, when we're building psychological safety, with helping people understand how to show up. And that fundamentally, that's emotional intelligence, because at the end of the day, emotional intelligence is understanding the way you show up determines the way people feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they engage, and that determines pretty much everything. Now, the reason that this is the case is, I love this. This is one of the foremost neuroscientists. And he says, we're wired. We will never be wired differently. The simple base level, deepest machine code level programming of your brain says, minimize threats, maximize rewards. So we are always, always, always going to be running away from environments where we feel threatened, from people where we feel threatened. And if it's not socially acceptable to actually physically run away, well, then what we do is we run away by withdrawing. We start to protect ourselves, move away psychologically. We engage in avoidance behavior because, and again, that mantra,